Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our member webinar series. Today, we're pleased to be able to bring you the first webinar of 2022, welcoming Diana Hodgson, who will be presenting on making flexible work work. Before I hand over to Elaine Hiskins from Strategic Alignment Training, the HRA Staff Training and Development Partner, to introduce Diana, I want to cover off some housekeeping. We'll have a Q&A active during the webinar, so if you have a question, please post it here, and if we have time, we'll answer at the conclusion of the presentation. We will have chat set up between attendees and the presenter as well during the webinar. So if you are having issues hearing or seeing the presentation, please post on the chat so we can address any issues. And lastly, this webinar is being recorded and the recording will be made available to all members in the coming days. I'll now hand over to Aileen and Diana.
Thank you. Hi everyone. It's my absolute pleasure to introduce you or reintroduce you, if you've had the pleasure of meeting Diana before, to Diana Hodgson. So Diana is the founder of HR Strategic Partners, and as the name suggests, Diana partners with businesses to help them in their strategic needs to bring out the best in their people. We're so fortunate to have Diana with us. She brings a depth of experience. She's worked for large organisations and through diverse industries. Some of those organisations is BHP Billiton, ABB, and she's really had an opportunity to see the best. But what Diana can bring is, and you'll know as we go through the presentation today, is just this calm, considered, and so down to earth approach. It makes things simple for us to understand and to then be able to really practically use. Diana's got a depth of experience in the topic of today, the flexible work, and she's worked with a number of businesses to really help them actually really make it work and make it sustainable and make it work from a business perspective and from the individuals within that business to bring out their best. So you'll take some tips away from today, and no doubt Diana will be available to work with you in the future and to connect with you in the future. And I'd really encourage you to embrace that. I'd like you to join me in welcoming Diana Hodgson to our presentation today, and we're in incredibly good hands. Thank you so much, Diana.
Thank you, Aileen and Dee, both for the invitation and for the very kind words. Before we get into it, I would like to begin today by acknowledging the traditional owners of the respective lands on which we meet from today. For me, it's the Wurundjeri clan of the Woiwurrung people who have lived on and cared for this land for tens of thousands of years. I would also like to pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. As Aileen mentioned, I do have a really deep interest in flexible work, and I certainly think as much as COVID has been the bane of my existence for the past 2 years, this is certainly the COVID silver lining. The title of my white paper that I researched a few years back now, pre-pandemic, is How to Make Flexible Work Work. And I genuinely feel like it has never been more relevant. I know we were just talking at the start of this conversation with Dee and Sally in the HRIA office that the work from home mandates are changing. People are saying coming back into the office. I know that's sort of the tension is building for that where I am here in Melbourne. So I really feel like we kind of have to embrace this moment and have a look at how we can hopefully in very practical ways work forwards. I'm just going to share my screen before I continue, just to make sure we don't have sort of technical hitches. So Dee, can I just have the thumbs up from you that you can see my, yep, excellent. So in the pre-pandemic era, when I conducted my research, there were certainly bright spots in the area of flexible work, what we would call trailblazers. But flexible work was really still in its infancy. Even within organisations where they would have proclaimed all roles flex, I would suggest anecdotally it was still pretty hit and miss. All roles flex, depending on your manager. If you fast forward to 2020, very quickly, everyone who can work from home must work from home. and the world really shifted. There was certainly a huge flurry of calls to me saying we should have listened, and how do we do this? How do we move all of our people to working from home? I think importantly, particularly when I think about the audience today and the industry that you are in, a lot of jobs that people said could never be done remotely, all of a sudden are indeed able to be done either largely or wholly remotely. And a couple of examples that, you know, sort of connected with me were GPs, nursing staff, personal trainers. I know a large-scale engineering organisation have largely delivered huge projects remotely. As we then limped to the end of 2020 and looked forward to what we thought lay ahead for 2021, there was the predicted turnover tsunami, which quickly turned to the Great Resignation. And another flurry of calls came. And what started with how do we get people back into the office very quickly became how do we retain our staff? And I really want to reiterate that to all of you who are in leadership roles, organisational roles today, that second piece of how do we retain our staff is going to be absolutely critical to the way forward and how you balance your workforce. I did work with a number of organisations last year to reconsider their approach, and often had to have some really significant conversations to challenge mindsets, really quite set and ingrained mindsets, and ultimately we're rewriting flexible work policies and protocols for a number of organisations. So after 2 years of COVID, significantly increased levels of remote working in particular, where are we at? What do people want? And what are we able to do about it? So I did have a slide here that really talks to a couple of key statistics that I think are interesting. First one, the percentage of Australians working from home has increased from 8% to 40% in just 2 years. The prediction is that it will stay relatively high. It certainly will not go back anywhere near the level it was 2 years ago. The next statistic, over 40% of Australians are likely to switch jobs if they now have to return fully on site. So this is that retention piece. There is certainly a trend towards hybrid approach, so that balance between on-site and remote. There's not a suggestion that people want to continue working wholly from home, but there's also not a suggestion that everybody wants to come full scale back into the office or out onto site. And work-life balance is key to attraction and retention of staff. The two little sort of comment bubbles I've got over here, international research shows that flexible work promotes workforce participation, both for women and for men. It promotes employee satisfaction and productivity. The other one, which we were talking about a year ago, are traditional ways of working going to come back? The research suggests now traditional ways of working, which placed particularly great value on presenteeism, are now firmly in the past. So there is no going back. It's what does forward look like. When I think again about your industry in particular, hire and rental industry, it is important, despite the fact that COVID has given us a significant focus on remote work and working from home in particular, that is not all there is to the definition of flexible work. So the key elements are flexibility in hours, flexibility in location, and or flexibility in patterns of work. So the old school pattern of 9 to 5 with a half hour 45 lunch break in the middle is not the way of the future. So what did I do? If I can take you through my research findings on how we can make flexible work work, there were really consistent factors throughout the interviews that I conducted with people. I've used the iceberg as the metaphor because there is a clear tip of the iceberg, which in this case is technology. And then there are a number of factors that sit under the water, which have a huge impact, but aren't always that visible. And those key things are the team that you work within, the manager, and then the mindset of the individual. So the top three there really look at the working environment And the bottom one there really talks to the mindset of the individual. So let me take you through these in a little bit more detail. The first one is technology. And when I was talking to my interviewees, and there was sort of a little over 30, around 32, I think, employees, and a spread of men and women as well. The absolutely unanimous enabler was technology. The gift of COVID is where people previously didn't necessarily have the technology that enabled them to work remotely, they absolutely now have the technology. The key piece that goes with that technology, however, is what are the rules and protocols as to how we utilize the technology. And the example is, if you have a look at the Zoom meeting concept, when we're all in the Zoom room, so to speak, we all have this opportunity to speak, share, take turns around the room. We put up our virtual hand in order to speak next in the conversation. When we start to shift into this hybrid approach, so when some people are on Zoom and some people are physically in the room, what we then have is things that can become quite room-centric and start to become exclusive of people who are in the Zoom room. So you need to have a look at the practices and protocols of how we're going to run meetings that continue to help people feel included. One of the other pieces of technology that connects to the rules and protocols are things like when you've got your laptops, your emails, your phones, your communicator instant messenger devices, what are the practices that people want to use within your team? So there are going to be some people who say, I want to be on, I want to receive the emails at all times so that I can monitor what's going on, so I know how I'm going to start my day the next morning. There are other people who are going to say, I want to be able to switch off and I don't want to access my emails between these hours and these hours. Now, I'm not telling you what the rule around that should be, but what I am telling you is there will be different rules and experiences within your team, and you should talk to your team and understand and work together to create the protocols and rules that support the use of tools within your organisation. One of the other things that's really important, again, a bit of a COVID note on this one, is 69% of people post-COVID, post-pandemic, are now saying, I need more training and upskilling in how to use the technology. So make sure when you are teaching your people how to maximise and get the most effectiveness out of the technology, also integrate the conversation around what are our protocols going to be and how we're going to use the technology. So the second piece in the iceberg is the team. And there are two key elements here. One I've called the culture of care and one I've called effective work habits. The first thing that happened when COVID happened is everybody came into one another's houses, right? We met the pets, we met the children. For people who lived on their own, we took a lot more care to check in with those individuals to see how they were going. When I was talking to people about what makes flexible work work, it was really that people understand why I'm accessing flexible work and accept that without judgment. And what that enables them to do is show care for me, back me up and support, and I do the same in return. The second piece there, when it comes to effective work habits, one of the key things that people who work really effectively flexibly is that they are very good at organisation and planning and prioritisation. So one of the things that impacts their ability to work effectively is other people's work habits. So if I know you need to leave at 4:30 this afternoon and I am constantly grabbing you at about 4:15, have you got a minute when you know I'm just about to run out the door, that impacts my ability to successfully work flexibly. If it's something that happens every now and again, there was a huge amount of cookie jar, put the cookies in the cookie jar, you take the cookies out of the cookie jar. So people were absolutely understanding and accepting of the need for give and take. But when other people's work habits negatively impacted them, through what was perceived to be thoughtlessness and lack of their own organisation and planning that had a significantly negative effect on individuals and their ability to access flexible work. The second piece that's really important is this sort of undercurrent of competition. So this is the things like, do we need to be the first to answer or respond to an email of a key stakeholder or of a particular manager or boss? Do we feel like we need to get into the office first or early, or be seen to be staying last or later in the evening? All of these work habits undermine the ability to say, I've done what I need to deliver for the day, I'm off to what I'm doing next, whether it is volunteering, childcare, training for a marathon, whatever that looks like, that I'm able to hop up and go and do that. When you have, as one of my interviewees said, the whole team is a job share. When you have full trust and the ability to collaborate, the ability to share information, people not being possessive of information, not wanting to share for suspicion that somebody else might claim ownership or get credit for something, the more that you can openly share and back each other up, the more effectively everybody can work more flexibly. So my COVID note is, when you care, when you started to care because everybody was working from home, as that is shifting and changing, and I know that it's already changing, continue to show that care. You know what's happening now in people's lives, continue to engage and check in and support the reasons for which people access and want flexibility in their work. So the next one going down the iceberg is the manager. This is the single most impactful factor for effective flexible work. There were examples that were shared with me at both extremes: amazing managers, incredibly supportive, completely enabled, very effective flexible work. And then there were shockers, people who had been working effectively part-time or adjusted hours, different manager, and all of a sudden, no, you can't do that anymore. The key factors that a manager needs to practice are the following. The first one is support. Now, support by definition in this context is keep from failing. So if you think about scaffolding, again, in the higher and mental industry, being supportive means putting things in place to enable success. Some people will need different levels of scaffolding at different points in time. For some, that support might be stronger while they get set up, doing something differently while they're going through a particularly acute time for which they are requiring flexibility. But provide support. My manager is supportive of me, my manager provides support, offers support, etc. The second one is trust. Trust, again, if I can define it for you in this context, is a firm belief in reliability. If you believe you've hired the right people, you believe they're competent to do their job, trust them to do their job. The number of times, particularly last year and earlier, that I heard work from home means I'm watching Netflix is incredibly offensive to those people who are working from home, who will literally say, I have been more productive this year than I have in the past. I am more productive when I work from home. But this sort of sideline assumption that if I can't see you, you're not doing the work that's required, completely undermines effective flexible work. So again, and we'll get to how you can measure outcomes without FaceTime, but you need to make sure that you can trust and start from a place of trust rather than starting from a place of mistrust and assuming that people will be watching Netflix or golfing, or even people refer to it as a day off when it's actually a day where people are working constructively, effectively, productively from home. Autonomy is the third one, which is really saying, again, I know which meetings are important. I know what our priorities are. Hire good people, get out of their way, and give them the autonomy to deliver their work, to do their job. The next one which if manager is the single most important factor for flexible work, role modelling is the single most important thing that a manager can do in order to enable more effective flexible work. People need to look up and around and see other people using these practices. Managers in particular, if we say we have the policy, but nobody at that higher level is seen to be practicing it, then I don't really feel like it's acceptable and accessible. There are a number of examples, again, that I have. There are people who quite a few years ago were saying, I remember a very senior female in one organisation who said she had an agreement, a formal agreement with her manager, who was the CEO of this large organisation at that time, that she could leave at 3 o'clock twice a week. What she did was she always made sure there was a jacket on the back of her chair and that the light to her office was always left on so that people didn't know she'd left. The problem with that is when people look up and around, they see that this person is constantly working, the light is always on, the jacket is always there, she never goes home. When in fact, she was able to very effectively go home for several years. And for her, it was with regards to kids. She wanted to be there at least a couple of times a week when her children got home from school. And then she switched back on later at night and, you know, caught up on her work and all of those sorts of things. So absolutely was continuing to deliver, but didn't want other people to see that. There's another one that I heard of recently where a senior male partner in a large organisation worked 4 days a week, formal arrangement to work 4 days a week. That was a very carefully guarded secret because they didn't want to set a precedent. They didn't want people to know that this senior individual was working 4 days a week. And that had nothing to do with childcare. This was a much older gentleman in an organisation. So the key is, and there was a bit of a tagline a couple of years ago, that leaders leave loudly. So role model flexibility and do it visibly. The final piece with regards to the manager is having an outcome focus. This is talking about make sure you're confident in what success looks like. Make sure you understand what each of your roles and individuals need to deliver, but then monitor meaningful progress. Don't micromanage. Don't ask people to justify their existence and how many hours did you work today, but genuinely monitor meaningful progress. It might be what are the barriers, it might be celebrating milestones, it might be talk through the challenges and hurdles and what support you need to get to the next stage of a project or to deliver the next couple of key deliverables, but make sure you're judging on outcomes, not hours worked. There are a couple of pieces that I did, so my acronym, if you like, is the STAR of flexible work. And I absolutely would suggest that these are things that will also make you a more broad STAR of leadership. So support, trust and autonomy, role modelling and having an outcome focus. The other thing that I wanted to add with regards to this is a COVID note. So research has told us just within the past 12 to 18 months, so within the pandemic specifically, tracking results, not hours, has emerged as a more effective way to measure productivity. So having a look at your ways to do that will be really useful more broadly for the organisation. Empathy, trust and a new focus on wellbeing and culture building are the most important leadership skills in the new era of work. So again, coming back to that support, trust and autonomy, being able to do those things and deliver for your team will be critical skills for leaders to have. 74% of employees want their managers to demonstrate a leadership style focused on empathy and a supportive attitude. And the last one, I have my own note on the COVID note. Employers have gained the trust of their employees, with 88% of people saying managers met or exceeded their expectations during this time. Now, my note on that one is that early in the pandemic, managers showed exceptional levels of empathy and care. There was a quote I had, the magnitude of the threat to lives and livelihoods has shocked Australian politics, I would also suggest leaders, into uncharacteristic displays of emotional intelligence. So that was early in the pandemic. what we're seeing now is a lot of people saying, right, there's a return to the office requirement, or people are no longer saying you have to work from home. How managers, leaders and organisations step into this conversation will be critical. So are you now going to flip and say, right, everybody back into the office? My suggestion will be, if you take that lens, a lot of your people will leave or certainly become significantly more disengaged. If you continue the approach that you had leading into the pandemic, speak to your people, work with your people, communicate to them what your thoughts are, what your objectives are, and ask them what will work for you, how can we work together in order to enable an effective future of flexible work practices for our organisation. The final piece on the iceberg is the mindset. And this is where we shift a little from looking at the organisational or the working environment to the individual. There were two very stark mindsets that I uncovered during my research. The first one I have called the constraining mindset, and the second is called the enabling mindset. So if I describe for you first what each of those look like. The constraining mindset is where first a person feels a deep debt of gratitude to the organisation. Thank you so much for the benefit of allowing me to work flexibly. The second piece that they feel is the reason I am accessing flexible work is for an other. So whether it is for my family, for an aging parent, for it is generally a sacrifice for other. The combination of those two things, the deeper my gratitude, the more my sacrifice for other, the greater the emotional conflict. And the term that I heard a lot was guilt, because I don't feel like I'm giving back sufficiently to my organisation, and I feel like I have this real pull for delivering whatever it is that I need to access this flexible work for. The flip side of that was what I have called the enabling mindset. And the people who sat in this category, I've said, firstly, they have a sense of entitlement. Thank you, I would like to work flexibly, and we carry on and do it. We figure out how it works and we move on. The second thing they do is have a look at balance as their reason. And the difference between this one and sacrifice is I am doing this for my balance, my ability to balance my work outcomes with my personal home extracurricular requirements. And because of the difference in mindset there, I then move to logistics. What are the things that I have to put in place to enable me to deliver on my work outcomes and deliver on my personal objectives? And so this is where the critical mindset of the individual, the more you can move to an enabling mindset, where it is an entitlement that I have, and I would suggest that all people can have increasingly, I then am balancing a variety of different elements in my life, and I need to work out the logistics to make that happen, whether it's outsourcing, whether it's, delegating within the workplace, prioritising, whatever that looks like. It comes down to logistics, which is far more constructive than a depth of emotional conflict. If I think about the COVID note here, the more that people have experienced success working flexibly, the greater the opportunity you have as an organisation to really drive for the enabling mindset. And the note that I sort of put in here is, do you see flexible work as a benefit, so for an individual, or as a way of working for everybody? And the more that you can see it as a way of working for everybody, the more you will drive people towards the enabling mindset, rather than people needing to feel a deep sense of gratitude for thank you for allowing me to continue to work some portion of my week from home, or for being able to leave slightly early one afternoon per week so that I can, deliver on my objectives from my personal life perspective. So the more that you can embed that as a way of working, the more you will enable the enabling mindset. and the more productive overall and the more engaged your workforce will be. The one other thing I'll say on the mindset piece, I think, is really, particularly during COVID, the burden of proof has significantly shifted. So previously there was a lot of talk around, you prove to me how it can work, and I'll then think about whether we enable this as an opportunity for you or as a benefit. 2 years later, I've shown you it can work. A lot of organisations have said we've had our most profitable or our most productive year in however long. Now people have demonstrated it can work. So we need to shift that burden of proof to say, how do we continue to make these things work whilst also balancing the organisation's requirements, collaboration, innovation, engagement, all of those things. But it's not an all or nothing either way. It now comes down to discussion and enabling flexible work to be an effective way forward for your organisation. So my final slide, and I've had to bring in the International Women's Day little hashtag there, which is break the bias. So the first thing is, if I can give you kind of 3 key takeaways, think of it as a way of working for everyone, not just a benefit for the few. The second is, ask yourself, how can I role model flexible work? It doesn't have to be working from home. It doesn't have to be remote work. It might be those shifting patterns of work, shifting hours, job sharing, other things. So be creative in how you think about that. And then think how to rather than why not. So rather than starting from, these are all the reasons why you can't do that, why you can't continue to work from home, why you can't, work amended hours or whatever, let's have a look at how we can make that work. That might be job design, might be reallocating some tasks and activities. So there are certain things you can do at a different time in day, certain things that need to be done on site or in an office. But let's switch the question or the observation to how do we get that done, rather than all of the reasons why we think we can't. That is it from me. I feel like it's sort of a lot of talking, but I might hand back to Dee and Aileen to see if there are any questions or comments. Always love to hear feedback and insights, and would love to hear how people have been making it work and what thoughts you have.
Thank you, Diana. We don't have any questions yet. So if anyone would like to ask a question, now is the time. Okay. So we don't have any questions. So I guess we'll just wrap up. So that concludes today's webinar. A huge thank you to Diana and to everyone for attending. The next webinar will be held on International Women's Day, which is Tuesday, the 8th of March, with Shannon Keeley, General Manager of Erebus Race Team, presenting on the theme Break the Bias. So we'll be sending out an invitation to that shortly. As always, the National Office is always here to assist, so please feel free to reach out. Thank you.
I think we've got some comments coming through now.
Oh, now we have comments.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
They just said thank you. Very insightful.
Yeah, absolutely, it is.
Just thanks and praise, Diana.
Yeah.
Oh, look, so welcome. And I think, again, it's one of those things that I know sometimes feels like, for individuals, how are we going to approach this? And there's a lot of conversation right now, particularly around this return to the office mandates and the tension there. And I just can't reiterate enough, communication is going to be critical. Tell people what you're thinking, but also ask them, talk to them, find out what works and really work through it together.
Well, there's a lot of really good conversation starters that you've presented today to sort of start that conversation with your employer as well, or your employees. Yep,
absolutely. Great. Thanks for
Diana, what's the best way to reach out to you if, because what you were saying today, again, every time you speak, I take something else from it. And so it's absorbing, that sort of information. And today my takeaway was the mindset, the constraining and the enabling mindset. I thought that was just so right, so significant, because it can be challenging to kind of feel like you're not doing it because you really thankful, and I'm only doing it for this, and I wouldn't do it if I didn't have to, and sort of that kind of thing. So for me, that's been really significant to think in my own mind. So reaching out to you, obviously Dee's got all your contact details, and I'm sure that there'll be others like myself that would be interested in just expanding on that conversation. And I know the great work that you've done, and I know you've helped a number of my clients outside the industry really get this right. So thank you so much, Diana, for your time and for your advice.
We have had some comments while we've been chatting. One comment was the difference between having a flexible and supportive workplace and working for a company that doesn't view you as a person with a life is huge for mental health as well.
Correct.
Yeah.
Really significant. And again, the research currently says people will go.
Yeah.
They actually, in this moment in time, there are so many organisations out there who are really, really shifting the way they're doing it. And the pandemic has really triggered for people a rethink about what their priorities are. And so if ever there was a time in your organisation that you wanted to challenge yourselves for how do we really get the best people and keep the best people, this is central to what that looks like, I believe. Yeah. And the mental health piece, flexibility, autonomy, trust, these are all things that enable better mental health. I think that piece, Aileen, if I can, when you talk about the constraining mindset, if you have a look at what has happened in this kind of COVID moment of people working from home, and I'm one of them, I have 2 kids who are school age, working from home and supporting children who are remote schooling is really, really hard. But once the kids are back at school, I don't want to have that constraining moment assumed on me as the female. And so I think that's where there is a huge opportunity here around gender balance. And if you look at International Women's Day, break the bias. Let's really change up. Why do we want to access flexible work? Really strive towards that enabling mentality, that enabling mindset, that it is an entitlement that we should all have, that we can all start from. And then where do we go from there? So it is equally accessible for men and women across age groups to work flexibly, to shift the hours that they work, to work remotely where it's possible, because they have the trust and autonomy to get their job done. And that will drive this enabling mindset. And if you create the environment, to that person's comments that you just made before, Dee, if you create the environment, people will work more effectively, constructively, productively for your organisation. The other question you asked, Aileen, is how to get in contact with me. Absolutely, Dee has my details, and also happy to send through the white paper. So you've got the fuller research and my email and contact details.
Yeah. Okay.
Now, Diana, you and I have worked together for some 20 years now, I think, actually. That's aging me and you. But I'm wondering whether you could just share a little bit about how you've your flexibility in your work life, because I know some people might be on the call going, that all sounds very great, but would it impede my career? And I know that you've had an incredible career, a very successful career, and you continue to. So just wondering whether you might want to share a little bit about how flexibility has worked for you.
Yeah, sure. It's I think that the thing that started sort of really piqued my interest. I mean, when you and I met, you were one of my first flexible employees, Aileen.
That's right.
Back in the day. When I worked for an organisation relatively early in my career, before pre-kids, and I was, it was at a time in my career where I was having a lot of fun, flying around the world, working really long hours. That's kind of my, my modus operandi. I was a hard and dedicated worker. I remember an older gentleman who wanted to stage his retirement, and he wanted to go from 5 days a week to 4 days a week. He was an active line manager in the organisation, and he wanted to start a tulip farm on his 5th day of the week. And he was told that you cannot have people management responsibilities and work less than full time. So he was moved sideways into a training role where he didn't have any direct reports. And that was really the start for me. But I thought two things at that time. I thought I was in HR, operational HR roles at that time. And I thought this cannot be about young women. This has to be about people who he had the credibility. He had all of the things that people would say, you know, at that stage, maybe I didn't have. So what I went about is making this about everybody else. How can we make sure that this is not something that is targeted just at young women? After that organisation, I did, you know, have children, and I took time off. My husband also took time off. I went and worked for, with my first child, to answer your question around flexible work for me, I took 9 months off, and then I went back part-time, negotiated that, and the organisation were very happy to adapt to my request. I then was headhunted by another organisation and moved into a full-time role, and my husband and I swapped. So he was full-time stay-at-home dad, and he did that for about 2 years, while I worked, to be honest, quite ridiculous, crazy hours and levels of intensity. On my second parental leave, when I was coming back, I negotiated with this organisation. It was BHP. And I said to them, I want to come back part-time. And they said, oh, well, we've got all of these roles, but we don't have anything for you part-time. And again, my connection to them was, if I have a look at when I was working in these different roles, I could have been in the office in Adelaide or on site, and it wouldn't have mattered where I was showing up from. A lot of executives spend a lot of time pre-COVID travelling. It doesn't matter where they are when they get the job done, as long as they get the job done. And so these people sort of said, oh, okay, well, let's continue the conversation. And throughout the negotiation, I actually came to an arrangement where they wanted me to start early in a particular role. And I said, okay, well, if you want me to start then, I can work 1 day a week and I'll work it from home. And they said, okay. And so I did. And I graduated my return through very careful, respectful conversation. It was never aggressive. And I think, Aileen, you and I have talked about this before, about the stance that I always recommend people take is the dance rather than the battle. I think as soon as you feel like you're going into fight, it becomes a much more difficult conversation. It's about a win and a lose. Whereas if you feel like you are understanding the requirements of your employer, your manager, your organisation, and share the requirements of yourself, and then have a look at ways that we can make this work, it's more effective than coming in, this is what I want, this is what I need, this is what you've got to let me have. Because then you haven't got the wriggle room and the opportunity for discussion to enable outcomes.
So true.
Yeah.
There's so many points you've made today, Diana. You and I have lots of conversations on this, and we'll definitely be having another one. But leaders on the call, how much emphasis it is on leadership, the negotiation skills, the knowing what it is, being planned, being organised. Some amazing capabilities in there that I know that you teach really well also, and you help businesses through. So thank you.
Diana, before you go,
yeah.
We've just had another, excuse me, another comment. Someone who finds the guilt of flexible work overwhelming when someone who is needed to be on site mentions how lucky they are to be working from home.
Yeah. That's the team piece. It's and another thing about the team piece is be careful of the little quips you make. You know, be careful even what you say to me as a flexible worker, what you say to me about Dee. You know, if you say to me, oh, Dee's always leaving at 4, or when are we seeing her next? How do I know what you say about me behind my back? That tells me what you really think of flexible work. Yeah. And I do think it's being really conscious, and it's not to go overboard on, you know, political correctness and all of those sorts of things, but it's to be conscious, and it's to come back to those things of know why somebody's accessing flexible work, don't judge it, and support them. You know, so it might be how was your son's soccer last night? It might be how did you go with your training time this morning? My brother in Perth at the moment is doing Laps for Life you know, sort of supporting fundraising and those sorts of things, and he's out in the mornings and he's doing swimming the laps and all of those, engage with them about why they're doing it. And that's what shows, you know, that you care, rather than a side comment that you judge.
And don't feel guilty because you're working from home.
Absolutely.
Don't feel guilty.
I genuinely say that. Own it. Release yourself of the guilt.
Yeah. And it's not just working from home, as Diana's pointed out, flexibility, because some people on the call might be going, well, you know, that's impossible in certain ways, but it's having the conversation, isn't it, Diana, and looking at what flexibility looks like. And it may be working from home, but the drivers, truck drivers, have got great ways of looking at flexibility as well. I know of some of those examples too, of where they do their paperwork. And, you know, it doesn't always have to be there. That's great.
Yeah. And I think that's, you know, if you look at some of these organisations like a BHP, they've got huge resources going into how do we redesign the work to enable greater flexibility, whether it is abilities to do it remotely, whether it's doing it at different times, you know, that sort of location, hours, patterns of work. Think about it in the breadth of what are the opportunities here that can potentially enable greater flexibility.
That was great. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Thank you, everyone. As I said, we'll get the recording out to everyone, or to all members, as soon as it's available. Thank you again so much, Diana.
Pleasure, always. Thanks so much, Jen.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Emma.